Good day to you. Colors make a difference in life, don't they? I've got on a pink shirt today. It's maybe communicating a lighter mood. Maybe it's saying spring is on the way. It's not exactly a winter color. Contrasted with a black tie. Two of the most important colors that we see almost every single day are red, which is a color that signals alarm in some cases. That's why our stop signs are colored red. And blue, which can be a soothing color, as in sky blue. But when you put those two together, red and blue, what's it like? I'm sure you don't want to be driving at night and see red and blue in your rearview mirror, for example. It's the police, right? And so what happens when you go to Mexico, a country that's in the news all the time, mainly for bad things, right? Such as drug cartel business and really horrific murders. Those are the kinds of things that are covered by foreign media when Mexico is talked about. So you get down into Mexico and all of a sudden you see police cars everywhere with their lights on. The lights are on and the police are going out. They're driving at normal speeds though. What's going on? It's a very, very scary impression to have as a first impression when you go to Mexico, but only because you're filtering those sites through the prism of media that you've been accessing your whole life. Because in Mexico, the culture is completely opposite when it comes to the red and blue. The red and blue in Mexico are designed to let you know that there is a police officer in the area if you need it. You don't have to go looking for a police officer. Have you ever needed a police officer in a city and you couldn't find one, you didn't know where they are, you had to make a call, go through 911, etc.? That doesn't make any sense if there's a car around the corner. Why not know there's a car around the corner? Because they have their lights on. Isn't that an amazing paradigm shift that takes place? And that's why I'm introducing class this way. I'm introducing class this way because we are talking about cultural characteristics. Cultural characteristics is a layer of characteristics that exists at the level of Earth. It's like you have to dig down below the surface of the earth to get to these cultural characteristics. And when you do, you can start to gain an understanding of the country which comes later out of the cultural characteristics, which then gives birth to, if I can use that metaphor, a media system. A media system that's comprised of television, radio, newspapers, the internet, satellite, and micromedia like flashing lights on a police car, which are standard media. And so we're taking on cultural characteristics today. It's another broad approach to studying comparative media that as we start to get deeper and deeper into the class, we've started with globalization swirling all around us, and now we're heading into cultural characteristics. Before I go there, though, I do want to notify you that there will be a difference as we go forward with your country media posts. The country media posts will not be unlocked until you watch the instructor video. You have to watch the instructor video. That's because I want you to have some of the background information that I'm going to be providing exclusively in the instructor video that will help then shape your answers to your country media posts. So having said that, let's move on to cultural characteristics. And by the way, I do have my book here that I'm drawing much of this material from, just so you can see what it is. It's Comparing Media from Around the World. It was published in 2006 by the Pearson Company, Pearson Education Company, the largest educational publisher. And the material that you read on D2L is extracted from that book. So, culture. Culture is a densely packed term. It has so many different meanings, and those meanings can be really at odds with each other. For example, you can have high culture, which is going to consist of the fine arts, for example, ballet, opera, symphony, and then you can have pop culture, pop culture like Ariana Grande or Justin Timberlake or Kobe Bryant. These are popular figures. And these two can clash against each other. Right? People are high culture. So culture is high culture. Other people know popular culture is basically what is spreading throughout the user consumer needs. Well, those are not the kinds of cultural terms that we are using in this chapter. Culture, the way that we are using it in this course, in this chapter, is derived from the cultural anthropologists, the Hofstedes, a husband and wife team, the Hofstedes. They did a lot of work in cultural anthropology, which is excavating artifacts to learn about how human beings lived. And I actually have a kind of, I think, funny column in the book in Rounding Some Corners that is kind of imitating what people would have discovered in the future if they came back and look at society today. See if you can find that column if you're interested in looking at it. Anyway, we're taking on culture today as the Hofstedes meant it, and that is to basically look at the way that everyday people live their lives in a country. The way that everyday people live their lives in the country. I just come back from Mexico a week ago, And when I was there, you don't see people eating sandwiches for lunch. They just don't eat it. So the bread is not a common item in Mexico unless you get it at a panera, a bakery, and you're going to have a bun. That's the kind of bread that's eaten. But for sandwiches, no, it's all about the tortilla. So it's a completely different way of living during the day. You go buy tacos. You buy tacos, little tiny tacos, not the tacos you have at Taco Bell. That's not a real taco. I'm talking about Mexican tacos. It's a completely different way of life. It's a way that people live their life, and that's what we're studying today. So that's what you're going to be taking on. How is culture unique for your country? That's what you're going to be, in essence, researching today as you approach today's assignment. And we're going to break that down by looking at 3 categories that you can choose to focus on in your country media post today. So the first category that helps deconstruct culture is the geography of a country. The geography of a country. Is the country that you're studying near countries, or is it isolated? So, for example, the United States, it's a huge country. It's the 3rd biggest country in the world, but we only border 2 countries. How amazing is that, Mexico and Canada, when you compare the U.S. to a country like France, which is surrounded by, I think it's 9 countries. You've got Luxembourg, you've got Germany, you've got Spain, you've got Belgium. There are lots of countries surrounding France. And what if you're a tiny country surrounded by big countries? How is that going to influence the way that media grow up? Are you going to be fighting off all these other countries' media imports coming into your country, for example? Or what if you are a monstrous country like Russia? Russia's got 11 time zones. We have 4 in this country. Russia is so wide it has 11 time zones. How do you program evening news in Russia? Because when you're putting on the evening news at 6:30 at night on television, it's 6:30 at night in television in one part of the country, and it's like 5:30 in the morning in another part of the country. How do you program that? So these are things that have to do with geography that then start to influence the development of media within a country. And certain countries have challenges based on their internal geography, which is to say, can the countries feed themselves? Are they made up of desert? Are they made up of densely tropical forests? Are they in parts of the world that are susceptible to hurricanes? The geography of a country is very important in influencing the culture. And then there's the whole idea of the colonial territories that still exist across the world. During the colonial empire, not that colonization isn't still taking place today, it is. We've established that in some sense through media. But the old colonization was through Britain and Portugal, and Spain, France, sending their fleets of ships around the world to conquer various places. In England in particular, this tiny little island at one point controlled 25% of the world's countries. They were everywhere. New Zealand, Australia, Jamaica, the United States, Canada, Singapore. Yeah, it was really amazing. And, Portugal had similar achievements, if you want to call it that. But when they rolled up the welcome mat, that's not a good metaphor. When they pulled out of the countries that they virtually destroyed in so many ways, the legacy of their culture remains behind. So you go to Haiti today, Haitian people are speaking French. You go to Montreal today, Montreal people are speaking French. You go to St. Martin in the Caribbean, half of the island is speaking French. You go to French Guiana in South America, speaking French. And so these countries are looking for French media content. Where are they looking to? They're looking to France. There's still a connection there because France is an old, established, and wealthy Western country compared with a St. Martin to be able to produce television shows, newspapers, films. Yeah, so we have colonization that has taken place and has left a legacy on the geography of a country, and maybe your country is going to be one of these former colonial properties. And then within geography, we have languages. We have languages within a country. Some countries have multiple languages. Like Ghana not only has multiple languages, but many of the languages are tribal languages. And that means they do not have a written form. They are only in oral form. So if you're a newspaper publisher or a web page publisher, right away, you're dead in the water if you want to use text to get to people who are speaking these tribal languages, if that's their only language. You have to use visual imagery or you have to use radio to get to them by the ear. So languages are very important to consider. You've got Canada. Canada has to program in 2 different languages. They have an entire province that is French-speaking, the Quebecian province. So anytime they produce programming, they have to produce it in 2 languages. And we're seeing that happening in the United States. Predictions are that we're going to be mostly Spanish-speaking by the year 2050. That's in only 30 years. And so languages have a lot to do. You have a country like Sweden, which has a ton of Finnish immigrants, people from Finland. I've been to both of those countries, and Sweden, as a result, has to program a lot of its radio content in Finnish, which is a completely different language than Swedish. So you can think about if you want to focus on geography today. Next up is the component of culture of government, of the governing body that controls the organization of society in the country. And you have different kinds of government. Many of you will feel overwhelmed because studying the complexity of government is not easy if you're not a political scientist, but you have parliamentary democracies, you have democratic republics, you have just flat out republics, you have totalitarian regimes, you have different mixes. What we're trying to get at here is the type of government that exists in the country that you're studying. Is that government more or less influential in the control of media content? Is that control coming from direct fines if a radio station violates an editorial policy by criticizing a president of a country and that country's president cannot be criticized? That's what we're looking at here. We're trying to find out how government eventually is going to be influencing the media that grow up in the country that you're studying. Now, we will be coming to a chapter that's called Regulation, and that specifically will show how government as an outreach uses regulatory bodies to control media. But government has many different ways of influencing media. In France, for example, they have a republic. And due to the fact that France was overrun by Germany twice, France has decided that a critical role of media is to make sure that pluralism continues to exist. France never wants to see Nazism or what's the word that I'm looking for, but fanaticism of any form take over in an extreme form as the only dialogue and the only framework of looking at the world. So to have a radio station in France, you have to add to the mix. You have to say, oh, there's no Jewish station out there. There's no anarchist station. There's no right-wing radio station. If it's missing, France wants to have that into the mix. And so it has a lot to do with the history of the country. And France also, as a result, with its government, wants to be involved in the competition of the media marketplace. Now, this may be mind-blowing to you, but what that means is in the United States, you'll have commercial television shows that are competing for an audience at 8 o'clock at night, which is prime time. And all of those programs are produced by commercial companies, Fox, NBC, etc. In France, the government wants to be involved. So the government will produce a show, but it won't force the show. It will produce a show and then let it compete with all of the commercial television producers. Now, this is known as a Gaullist kind of government, named after General de Gaulle, who came into power after World War II and decided that the government had to be involved in the commercial marketplace because no longer, again, could France ever be run over in a world war. So these are the kinds of things that you can be looking at when it comes to the government structure in the country and how that country is organized, including the media component. Next up, and finally, as a component of culture, we're taking a look at society. Society is how people bond together and interact with each other, and languages play a part of that. We have people at ESU that speak different languages than English, right? You can speak a kind of a hip-hop when you're at parties. That's a kind of a language that you can speak. You can speak texting. Texting is a completely different kind of language with the emojis, etc. So we have, new micro-languages that are emerging, but we also have many, many other more macro languages, interplay of Spanish, French, English, Chinese, Mandarin is the main form of Chinese. And there are many Asian languages, Middle Eastern languages, Arabic languages. Lebanon, for example, is a country that was overrun by so many colonial empires because it's a doormat to get to the you can look at it that way. You have to go through the tiny country of Lebanon to get to the Middle East if you're coming from Europe. It's a doormat. And it's been overrun so many times that it actually has a social status that if you speak French in Lebanon, you have high social status. And so it's not seen as a language spoken by people who are oppressed or have been imprisoned or been extradited to other countries. This is a social status due to language. I've already talked about language, but I wanted to circle back during society as well. Then there's the idea of class differences. class differences, which we have a lot of in the United States. That's what capitalism is based on. It's based on class differences, based on the idea that everybody aspires to and believes that they can become a rich millionaire, but the reality is really much different. You have only to go across the bridge here in East Stroudsburg to 2nd Street and take a ride around. You'll see what I mean. We have a lot of class differences in terms of people and the money that they make, and then what they can afford when it comes to media properties. I mean, what's the phone in your pocket? Are you dealing with a really old iPhone 6? Do you have a flip phone? I don't think so. You might have an iPhone 6, but not a flip phone. But there are plenty of people still using flip phones. I was in Mexico, plenty of people still using flip phones. Go to the inner city here, you can find senior citizens still using flip phones. There are class differences that come into play, not just in terms of these examples that I'm giving, but also in terms of the media that you can access. How many of you can afford Netflix? How many of you are tapping illegally into a streaming service right now, and you justify it because you can't afford it? You're a poor, broken student, so you're using somebody else's password when you know you shouldn't be. You know it's wrong, you know it's illegal, but you don't care because you justify it. That's all part of a class difference mentality. Also in society, you can look at ethnicity. You can look at ethnicity. One of the most horrific civil wars occurred in Rwanda and Africa between the Tutsis and the Hutus. And part of the reason that happened was because radio stations on the Tutsi side, I think, I might have that wrong, the Tutsi side started calling Hutus cockroaches. Cockroaches on radio programs. Cockroaches is a term that in the folklore of African culture is one of the worst things that you could call a person. And so we're looking at ethnicity here. That's a really awful example, but we also have plenty of examples of great blends. Look at, for example, Patrick Mahomes. He's being held up as a great example of a biracial, multiracial person that may be the new face of sports in our country as our country continues to pursue its melting pot path of people coming together, where eventually maybe ethnicity will completely disappear because there will be so many mixed races. But ethnicity does come to play in cultures, and then that affects the media. Next up is religions, for same and similar reasons. Many of the countries in the Middle East are governed by Islam, and not meaning to single Islam out here. Believe me, I have as many criticisms of Christianity, but Islam is a religious doctrine that is actually laid out in the Quran as to how to set up government and law and lots of other things. So religion can have a very strict influence on media. Media in the Arab world, for the most part, are extremely restricted on what they can provide content-wise in areas of sexuality, profanity, drinking, and decadent Western behavior in general. And then finally, you have an economic system of a country. What's the economic system of the country? In the United States, we have flat-out capitalism. Capitalism organizes our social relations. I went to my eye doctor yesterday to pay a bill, and a veteran came out of the building and held the door for him. And he comes out, he goes, "Thanks." He goes, "I don't owe you anything for that, do you?" And I laughed, ha ha ha. I said, "You can pay me tomorrow." But guess what? That's capitalism organizing the way that we make jokes. It's so embedded in our culture that we don't see it. Try going to a country like Sweden, where there actually is a definitive effort to keep commercialism out of the public space. So therefore, if you go to the beach in Sweden, you cannot have any billboards, no boardwalk type businesses, none of those things. The only thing you can have is an ice cream stand, because they want the coast to remain intact and beautiful. It's a concerted effort as part of a socialist market system in Sweden to make sure that people's rights to nature and freedom from commercialization are preserved in part through the media. Another example, taking it to a further extreme, is Russia. Russia has a totalitarian regime. Vladimir Putin right now is currently reconstructing the constitution with Russian lawmakers so that he can remain president for the rest of his life if he wants to. That's a totalitarian regime. And the television stations that exist in Russia are mostly owned by his political party and or investments by him. So you do not have there a media system that is growing up within a similar kind of system as a democracy. And that's something that you can consider taking a look at today. So there you have it, some entry points for you to look at your country in terms of cultural characteristics. I look forward to reading your post today. Have a great day.